I read Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy around 15 or 16 years ago. And even though it was a very long time ago, I still very distinctly remember many elements of the plot and the character arcs and just a lot of details from reading it. And I hated it. I really, really hated it. And I remember the book so well, or the series so well, because I disliked it so much, and also because it really disappointed me. And I'll get into that. So this is going to be an exercise, and I've intentionally not looked up anything. I kind of want to make a point that I remember all of this, even though I read it a long time ago, that I could remember this many details. Um, there are other books that I remember reading around the same time that I read this one. One specific book that I can remember, I forget the author of this one, but it was A Mote in God's Eye, which was an alien contact, like a first contact with alien sci-fi story that was written, I think, in the 60s or 70s maybe. And I remember liking it okay, but finding it rather lackluster. But if you held me at gunpoint and asked me to say, like, what was it about, what happened, what characters were there, I remember almost nothing. Whereas the first law trilogy, I'll tell you everything I remember and what I didn't like about it. So to start off here, um, the thing that really made me dislike this series, and also dislike Joe Abercrombie specifically, is that the it started off with a lot of potential and promise. It did a lot of things. It felt like it was doing a lot of things correctly. It felt like it was doing a lot of good stuff. And I also, like, the series had been pretty hyped up at that time. Joe Abercrombie is still pretty well regarded. You see his books, like, like on tables at the bookstore when they come out. Like, they get they're on a table. They're not spine only. They're like up on a table, right? That's means he's doing pretty well. Um, and back then, this I think the First Law trilogy was relatively new at that time, and people were hyping it, and I was looking for something to read, and so I was like, oh, I'll give this a shot. And I started reading, and it was like, oh, this seems really good. I'm excited. Um, and so, kind of one thing at a time, Abercrombie was like, oh, what if here's another thing that looks cool. Hey, look at this. Wouldn't isn't this interesting? And I was like, yeah, this is interesting. I like this. Where are you going to go with this? I want to see where you're going to take me with this interesting idea. Oh, you got this kind of character arc foreshadowed. I'm looking forward to see how this unfolds. Um, and then each of those things, so the beginning of the first book was like those things all being established and piquing my interest. And then somewhere, and again, this is part of, I do not have specific memory of like where exactly in each book things happened, but I can guess, and I'll tell you my best guess. But I think it was probably, I think there was a foreshadowing of things going wrong at the end of book one. And then book two, like the second half of book two, was like a cascade of disappointments. And then I probably only read book three because of sunk cost at that point. Um, but let's get concrete. Let's start out like what seemed good. So the first thing that seemed good to me was, and you got to go back, 09, 2010, the Game of Thrones, I don't think had even premiered yet. I had read those books only a few years previously, the first three at least, which were good. I didn't enjoy the fourth one. I don't think that's worth talking about, um, and I had finished most of Wheel of Time at that point. Basically, that era, this book felt like pretty fresh, and some of the stuff it was seeming to do looked really cool, and gave me a good first impression. So, for example, the the world building felt pretty good. Like it had a lot of potential when it started out. Um, at the risk of sounding like a Sanderson guy, the magic system, like, so let's maybe not say magic system. The thing that made it fantasy, right? It's a fantasy series. The thing that made this series a fantasy series is like let's call it the ontology. I think I like calling it the ontology. It's like, what is it that holds this world together? What is the lore, the religion, if there is magic, how does the magic factor in to the nature of reality that is created within this narrative? That all felt like it was interesting when it started out. There was I do not remember the character's name, but there was a magus. Magus being if you're going to get a thesaurus for wizard, magus is one of the coolest words that you can find in the thesaurus under the wizard entry. Magus is possibly the coolest word that you can get. And it was like, okay, magus, sure. I don't concretely remember anything that the magus did initially, but what I think Abercrombie did seem to do well, or I recall him doing well, was that he definitely injected some mystery into the magus. It wasn't like, I am a magus, here is the magic system, I'm going to flip a coin and let me explain my magic system to you, as Sanderson would have done. It was much more of I am very mysterious, and you don't know what I can do, and but he did a very good job at like hinting that there was some cool stuff under the surface and that we were going to learn some cool stuff. I also have a vague memory that the magus, the setting that we found him in, was felt interesting. It was my vague memory of it is it was like underground or in some kind of hidden cavern. There was kind of an aesthetic feeling that I remember of where the magus started, and I liked it. So that was one thing that had a lot of potential. The next second biggest one probably to me was there were three POV characters. One of them was, and I'm going to be very derogatory here based on my, I'm looking at hindsight with these derogatory names. Okay. At the time, I wouldn't have said this, but one of the characters was a Reddit coded Viking. He wasn't really a Viking, but you get the idea. The other character was a noble. I'm not being derogatory. It was let's say like a fallen noble, or a noble who goes through a lot of trials, who suffers a lot, who has a fall from grace, we can say it like that. And the other POV character, as best I can remember, was a demon archer, and she was always like hissing and was very not interesting. That's literally all I remember about her, is that she was a demon archer, and she may not even have been an archer, but I think she was a demon. And I think the demon reveal came very late, and it was just like, okay, she's a demon, whatever. But the noble had potential for me. I remember, again, I'm trawling my memory here, but I do remember it started out, he was very conceited and full of himself. He was, we were told that he was very attractive, kind of like a ladies' man type character. He was well off. I guess I don't remember the specifics of the economy in this book or anything, but it felt very much like a kind of like caste-based feudal type, late Middle Ages type thing, where he was from a noble house or whatnot, therefore he had status and money, and those things kind of went together. But he was also very attractive, and he was conceited and full of himself. And I remember the execution of this was kind of, felt like it was done pretty well, because you definitely didn't like this guy, because it's like a POV character and you don't like the POV character, but you didn't like him in a way where you thought you kind of. I think Abercrombie foreshadowed it well in the sense that you knew you were going to like him more as the story progressed because you were starting him from a position where he was very unlikable, but he was like competent, I think, in certain um, domains at least. Like maybe he was good at fighting, I think. He wasn't like just completely all bluster, right? And so you could, I remember thinking, okay, cool. So this guy, there's a lot of good character arc potential for this character. And I remember him being one of my favorite POV characters initially. And so early on, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I want to say that this character got in a fight. I think it was like a duel or a challenge, or maybe it was some kind of tournament, or maybe somebody attacked him. I don't remember the specifics of it, but I do remember I want to say he got like hit in the face with like a blunt weapon, like a mace or something like that, or a club or a hammer, and it really damaged his face to the point that he was badly injured, like he couldn't open his jaw. And when he finally recovered, he was no longer attractive. And I also think likely that whatever happened, whatever led up to that fight and the outcome of that fight resulted in him also losing some kind of favor or money. I don't remember exactly, but the point is he started out full of himself. He had everything, and he very quickly was humbled and lost everything. And that felt like a promising setup that made me want to keep reading. So those were the two like main potential things, like things that held potential that I was interested in. I don't particularly remember what I thought about the writing style itself as I was reading it, but I do have retention of what I thought of the writing style when I finished the series, and I don't have much good to say about that. But the fact that I was willing to read and I was excited, and that I actually finished the trilogy relatively quickly, means that the writing style couldn't have been that. Like the prose itself couldn't have been that bad, or it would have. I would have noticed it sooner, right? The other thing I do remember being excited about it and having piqued my interest was that the like, oh geez, I forgot what it was. I went on a tangent and forgot it. It will come back to me. I'll try to remember and mention it when I get to the disappointment maybe. So anyway, I remember it was they had this whole concept of an eater. So an eater was like basically you could have very strong, like very powerful abilities of some kind, but the downside was that you had to eat people. And this is maybe a weakness on my part, but I do really love the vampire archetype, and I always think it's interesting when people like find a new angle on that specific archetype. I had this like pocket idea for a story I always wanted to write, but I never fleshed it out very much. But just like I really liked the idea of a vampire that had to drink bone marrow rather than just suck blood. Just like little, even small little twists on that can make it a lot more interesting. Because like for example, one thing that happened with the vampire trope that kind of led to its downfall, I think, is the softening of the vampire itself. So you have like Twilight was kind of the end result of that, where you look at being a vampire and think to yourself like, well, there's not really much of a downside. Like I'll just like drink my girlfriend's blood from time to time and be immortal and awesome. The downside kind of eroded, but the drinking the bone marrow, that really becomes a downside. And I think I liked that with Abercrombie, the idea that you have to literally like cannibalize somebody rather than just like feed on them sometimes, made it much more of a interesting twist to me. So I've established a lot of things that seemed good to me, but let's get to what I didn't like. So I don't remember where exactly within the trilogy this started to happen, but the first thing I do really want to hammer in on is that what I recall happening is the Magus was basically the Moraine, like making a Wheel of Time reference. The Magus was Moraine, or he was Obi-Wan, or he was Gandalf. He was the wizard archetype character who gathers the party together. So I recall he was gathering the POV characters together, and I think all three of them went with the Magus to do a thing. And here's where it starts to get bad to me. I mentioned that I remember a lot of things about this book, and then there are certain things I have no recall of. It's interesting to look at it through this lens of memory, because like what I remember, there may have been a map in the beginning of the book, and I want to say there was a map, but it might have just been a thing where like the narration kind of gave you a good impression of the direction they were moving, and then the map was in my head. But whether the map was on the page or in my head, there was a map. And I believe that they started on the west end of the map. And then on the far east end of the map was like a coast. And there may have been an island off the coast. But it was at the east end. And at the easternmost edge of the map was the MacGuffin. And this is what I mean about the lens of memory, because I'm sure that as I was reading and excited about the book, it was not a MacGuffin. It was whatever the fuck it was, right? It was the important thing that motivated these characters to band together and go on an adventure and fight against whatever they were fighting against, and challenge themselves and however they were challenging themselves. But that it was a true motivating force. But my memory is that it was literally, it literally could have been called the MacGuffin, because that's what it ended up being. And I want to say that most of book one was going from point A to point B, going across the map to secure the MacGuffin. I have no recollection of what the MacGuffin did. I think it may have done something against ghosts, or maybe it summoned ghosts. I think it may, if I had to guess, it has some relation to ghosts, but I might be wrong about that. And so the thing was, there was like I don't want to be too critical of this. I don't want to inadvertently make a point that I'm not trying to make, but we spent a lot of time on screen traveling to the MacGuffin. And then after the MacGuffin was secured, my memory of this is that they basically town portaled back to the spawn location. And I'm going to start using video game language here very intentionally as part of my critique, because as things started to fall apart, the entire book started to feel more and more like a bad video game story in a number of ways. And this was my first like memory of that really crystallizing. It was like, okay, so we've finished Act 1. We've got the MacGuffin item, and now that we've got the MacGuffin item, let's activate our TP and go back to Deckard Cain, and Deckard Cain is going to tell us what to do with the MacGuffin. and you know, obviously it wasn't exactly like that, but it was like, because what I don't want to, the critique that I don't want to make is that, well, if you spent 300 pages getting the characters to the MacGuffin, then you should have to spend 300 pages getting them back. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that whatever Abercrombie did, I remember it, and I have a distinct memory 16 years later that it was very jarring and poorly executed. There was probably like a time jump. It wasn't done well. It I specifically remember it trivializing the entire journey in some way. Like it was like, oh well, we're just gonna TP back. Like that's the feeling I had. I can't really harp on that too much more, but it's a very distinct memory that I'm probably correct on. So I don't know when this happened either. It may have triggered the boss battle, may have triggered when they obtained the MacGuffin, or it may be that they TP'd back and turned their quests in, and then they went to the final boss battle for the end of Act One. But it was something. It was one of those three options. I don't quite remember exactly, but there was a fight at the end of it was, and again, it was probably at the end of book one. It might have been later that I'm recalling, but there was a fight, and it there I have no memory of any of the antagonists in this entire trilogy, with one exception. Um, well, I say no memory. I remember the character model of one of the boss battles, and one of the sub boss battles, but I don't remember what I don't remember anything about these as actual characters in a book. I don't remember any antagonists' motivations. I don't remember any interesting interaction with a single antagonist other than the Magus, who turns out to be an antagonist. I don't remember when that reveal happened, but I might talk about that again later. As far as like actual, this is the bad guy characters, I have no recollection of any of them. And at the end of book one, my memory of the boss battle is that the antagonist flew in from the sky, either leading an army of ghosts or he himself was a ghost. And it's possible that the MacGuffin summoned the ghosts, or maybe they used the MacGuffin to contain the ghosts, like a Ghostbuster type equipment or something. But I just remember this being very like, there was my first real feeling of like, this is kind of like a I won't consistently use Diablo references. Maybe it was like a Dragon's Age type situation where it was like, it kind of feels like I'm playing a computer game, like a computer RPG, but not like a Japanese one that has a kind of interesting story. It's not Final Fantasy Tactics, it's Dragon Age Origins or something, where it's like the story isn't really that good, but the gameplay is carrying it. Except in this case, there's no gameplay, and I'm watching a boss battle, and I don't care about the antagonist whatsoever. I have no notion of what they are. They're just a ghost. They're a mob, and the item that we obtained is related to them somehow. And I remember that being very kind of like, I don't know exactly how disappointed I was at that specific point, but I do remember thinking like, oh, that was kind of a weak ending, maybe. But I was still, on the hook. Like going back to the things I mentioned earlier, Abercrombie did a good job establishing a lot of mystery and getting me interested in various elements of this world he had established. And yeah, maybe he flubbed the ending of book one, that we had the TP MacGuffin ghost battle issue, but like we've got all these other interesting things, and maybe that's really where the book is going to shine, and or maybe he didn't handle this specific ending very well, but we got a lot of other interesting things in the pipeline, right? um but no, what ended up happening was, like, okay, let me take a slight detour to Logan. I still remember that. I think his name is like Logan Four Fingers or Logan Nine Fingers or Logan Eight Fingers. This is the Reddit Viking. Um, he had some number of fingers that he lost his fingers doing some epic Reddit adventure or whatever. Um, but this character, this is the kind of character where every worst guy on Reddit, it was his favorite character. It is my best explanation of this character. He was always like, the kind of like, I'm getting too old for this shit. Like, I don't. That's probably not the right voice to use for him. The Abercrombie is from the UK or Ireland. I don't remember where he's from, but it would be a British Isles accent of some kind, where, and the voice, I remember the voice of his writing had a distinct like um English or British Isles, whatever, like tone to it, right? Like the kind of um like dry humor that you associate with a lot of British authors, like Ian M. Banks, for example, or Douglas Adams, like that kind of lineage. So Logan started to really grate on me. I remember being like, okay, yeah, like this is definitely your favorite character, isn't it, Joe? You're really patting yourself on the back with this guy, aren't you? And I remember this is when his writing really started to grate on me too. Like, I remember, I don't remember exactly what it was, but the voice he used with Logan really started to get on my nerves. It would be like, if there was one thing Logan Nine Fingers told himself, it was that he wasn't gonna fuck with this. Like, it was like that. It wasn't exactly that, right? But it was. He had these kind of like little stock phrases he used. I was killing a bug. Um, and he got really repetitive with them, and it was just like, I just could see him like kind of like smugly looking at his keyboard as he typed this stuff out. I was like, bro, like, he's like, oh, I'm gonna get Reddit gold for this one, aren't I? But obviously it's not a Reddit post. So that's why I'm saying the Reddit Viking. So that started to fall apart for me. I started to really dislike that. I think somewhere in book 2 there was also a I don't remember the context of this at all, but there was a big battle, like it wasn't like a small scale battle. It was a big battle with soldiers and generals, and we were talking about things like command structure and tactics and provisioning armies, things like that. And I could do a whole. I am thinking of doing a video on Wheel of Time because I'm rereading it right now, and man, Robert Jordan does so many things wrong. He really does, but he's very, very good at what he does right. And one thing he really does well is makes battles interesting rather than just making them tedious fight scenes. He makes them he's really good at that. And Abercrombie was not good at that. And what really stuck with me was he had these two characters. They were two. I don't think they were necessarily generals, but they were two men who were high up in the hierarchy of the structure. They were high up on the pyramid of command, the chain of command. I don't remember what their rank was. It doesn't matter. They were quite high up, and they were written, it was such a poorly executed thing. Like, Abercrombie wanted to make them look incompetent. Um, and I'm mentioning Robert Jordan again. Jordan, I was just reading some chapters from Wheel of Time where Jordan did the same thing. He wanted to make an incompetent. He had some incompetent general characters. They were nobles, so they were full of themselves, but they didn't have the on the field experience to actually be good at it. But but everyone always tells them they're good, so therefore we have that. But Jordan did it in a way where you felt the kind of the satire and the criticism that he was doing, but the characters still felt like real people. The way Abercrombie did it, I just remember vividly, and I still remember these two characters were the most paper thin characters I've ever read in any book, like ever. They were just complete caricatures, and it was embarrassingly bad. Um, and they were on screen for quite a lot. Like it wasn't like there was one throwaway scene with them. Like you kept coming back to them, and it was like he was just bashing you over the head with look at how incompetent these idiots are. And like when you do it in a way, the way that he did it really detracted from the story and it just made him feel like an amateur. Like it was like it made it feel not just like an amateur. Maybe that's the wrong critique to lodge here. It was more that it made it feel like he didn't respect his readers, or he wasn't confident that his readers would be able to pick up on any form of subtlety. And so he's like, I need to make sure that these guys look dumb. And it was like, and he went way too far. And so I remember that being a kind of a slog somewhere in the middle of the trilogy of like this battle that was poorly written with these paper cutout commanders, and it was just tedium, like just pure tedium. That's all I remember about it. I don't remember what happened or what it had to do with the plot. Um, and then somewhere, probably around the end of book two, I'm guessing, we get the reveal that the Magus is not a good guy. He was manipulating them. He was manipulating the POV characters. The extent to which he was like the extent to sorry, my wife is calling me. The extent to which he was like betraying them or nefarious, I don't quite remember. Like, was he like actually the lead antagonistic figure, or was was it more just that he was like self-centered and he had his own agenda? I don't quite remember, but what I do remember is that by the point that reveal happened, it was like things had fallen apart enough that I kind of like didn't care, or that everything had started to be failed. Like all of these interesting things that had been introduced that had got me on the hook at the beginning were kind of one by one being like either botched outright, or I started to think, well, we're pretty far in now. Like I'm about to start book three, and these things that I thought were going to be cool, none of them have shown any, like none of them have come to any fruition or payoff at this point. Everything I was excited about was either failed or still developing, but not developing in a good way. And I realized that like time was running out. What was it going to be the case that like book three was suddenly going to deliver everything that I'd expected and that I was interested in? Probably not, because I just realized that like more likely than not things were going to be executed poorly. And let me give you some more examples of this, like why I was thinking that. So one one thing that happened which really, really put me off this guy's writing style, and I'm not going to necessarily say that this was bad writing, but it was not for me. There was a scene where Demon Archer and maybe the Noble were together in some, like, they were like in the scene together, and then Reddit Viking was off doing his own thing, I think. um or maybe they were all off doing their own thing, but it was very likely this was the climax of book two. It would be my best guess, like the climax scene of book two, where all three characters had their individual climactic things happening, but they were not physically in the same place or doing the same type of thing necessarily, but they were all having their own battles. And he, I want to say what he actually did was he ended each POV chapter with a word, whatever the word was, and then he jumped to the next POV, and that POV character was saying or thinking the word that the previous chapter ended with. And it just felt, it just struck me as very cringe. It was, when I mentioned earlier, like in my Sanderson video, I talked about how Sanderson would do things that, like, if it were an anime, it might work, but in a book, it doesn't. And this was, to me, like something that you just don't do in a book. It felt very much like every time he did it, and it was egregious. It was like for the entire climax, maybe it was 100, like close to 100 pages, and the POV shifts were pretty rapid. Like, I think it was kind of, I think he wanted to establish like a feeling of frenetic pacing by making the POV chapters, like each POV was a few pages, and then boom, shift to make it feel like it created a feeling of pacing, and it did achieve that. But you can imagine that little gimmicky word thing, that he just kept doing it every time the POV shifted, and it was like, all it really did is it pulled my, like, say you're attempting to do frenetic pacing, like, sure, you can do it, but like, why are you doing it? As an author, as a filmmaker, whatever the medium is, you're doing things for a specific reason, and what is that reason? So if one reason that you would do pacing like that, like, and have quick POV changes back and back, and and have, it could be done because you're trying to create, especially if you're shrinking each time you shift, it's getting shorter and shorter. It's kind of implying building toward a crescendo or to a climactic point, right? And then they all converge, and then they're suddenly in the same place or something. I don't remember exactly what happened, but that could be a reason that you do that. But I would say a big reason you would do something like that is because you're trying to keep the reader fully engaged. You're trying to keep the reader in a flow state. The reader is reading ostensibly, partially as an escape from reality. They want to be absorbed in the book. They don't want to be thinking, I'm reading a book. I love this book that I'm reading. They should just be like, what is Logan Ninefingers going to do? What is Demon Archer going to do? Like they shouldn't be remember that they exist. They're in the story. But every time you do that little gimmicky wordplay, you're like, oh, I'm reading a book. It just reminds me that I'm reading a book. It's like, hey, look how clever I am, says Joe Abercrombie. And it's like, oh yeah, and I remember Joe Abercrombie exists, but I don't want to remember that. I want to be in the climax. So I really hated that. I can't express how much I hated that, and I still remember distinctly hating it that much later. And I remember as part of this climactic sequence, there was a sub boss battle. And it was literally like, I think it was probably Logan, but it might have been the demon lady, the demon archer. At one point, like, either they were underground, or, which is I think more likely, the ground opened up and they like fell through the ground, like in you can imagine, like in Minecraft, like there's like a hole and they fall through the surface, and then there's like an underground chamber, and then they're suddenly underground, and there was like, just, it was literally like a sub boss battle. There was, for some reason, there was just like a really big monster, and they had to fight the monster. And there, this was not like, oh, it's this guy that we know exists. It was literally just like, oh yeah, bro, you went underground, so there's like sub bosses down there. Now you got to fight the sub boss. If you don't beat the sub boss, you like can't get out of this zone. Like, that's what it felt like. It was really bad. And that's when I think that was a moment I remember, like, ooh, this trilogy is really not working out, is it? And this was like on top of that little clever word stuff he was doing. And also, every Reddit Viking chapter was just like dripping with that Reddit humor voice thing that Logan Nine Fingers was doing, which I also hated. So, and I'll try to wrap this up. I knew this was going to be pretty long, but I don't have much more to say. One thing I will say is, I don't remember if, I want to say this was likely book 3, but one of the antagonists that I remembered seeming interesting, and this is what I mentioned when I said I remember his character model. I want to say he was like large for some reason, or he was wearing armor of some kind, but there was something about like inscriptions or runes or engravings, either on his body or on his armor. And we would occasionally cut to like a scene of him getting more engravings put on him, and there was some dialogue happening. And I mentioned none of the antagonists in this book were memorable whatsoever. I don't remember any of them other than what I'm saying, but I remember every time this happened, I remember thinking like, okay, this might end up being cool. Like, something interesting might happen from this. What's going on with these engravings or runes or whatever? What's going to happen? Like, what are these guys up to? And I kind of, it felt, even he was kind of dangling that initial promise that this trilogy had as this happened. And so, I kind of remember that. And then what it ended up being was, at some point in the story, the guy with the engravings surfaces in the POV of one of the protagonists. I don't remember which one. Maybe it was all of them. Maybe it was one of them. Who knows? And he activates his engravings, and it made him like stronger or something. And he was a boss. It was another boss battle. Like, it was literally just a boss battle, and then they beat him, and he was dead, and that was it. There was nothing. Like, there was all that build up for a throwaway boss battle. There was no, like, nothing happened of it. And so, fast forwarding toward the end of the trilogy, basically, like, you reach the end, and what is the cool thing that the Magus can do? I don't remember. I don't think he really did anything very interesting. What was the interesting ontology established in this world? I don't think there was one. I specifically remember being incredibly disappointed with the world building. It didn't go anywhere. Maybe the most I could say is that this was a world in which sub-bosses lurk beneath the earth, and where ghosts can be summoned via MacGuffins, and you can TP across the map. Like, that's, there's really, it just was not coherent. There was no feeling that this was a real world. This is a real um, there was it was just a complete failure of the promise that the trilogy initially showed, like complete and utter letdown. Um, Nothing was done with it. Nothing interesting happened, and the character arcs, like the noble guy probably had the best one, but I I don't remember what happened. I think he became more likable. He came somewhat to terms with the fact that he wasn't very attractive anymore. He found other things to focus on to some extent, but there was no clear character arc that sticks with me, at least. So I assume that's yet another thing that was more or less botched. I remember Logan Nine Fingers being, he got his Reddit wish of disappearing into the sunset, because he was fucking too old for this shit. Like, you know, just the kind of like, I just want to just let me chill. You know, like he didn't really want anything. He didn't want to be a badass, but the world called for him to be a badass. But now he was done being a badass. He'd achieved all the Reddit gold he needed, and now he was gonna go be a badass in a different way off screen. You know, that's kind of what I remember his ending. And then we got I think it was a really late reveal that the demon archer was actually a demon. And I don't quote me on this, but it's possible that she like started flying at the very end of the book. That was like the big reveal, was like she's a demon, and then she like started flying. Maybe she didn't fly, but it was something really stupid like that, where it was like her entire character arc, it actually felt like whatever she was at first was probably more fleshed out, and as the story went on she became more and more two-dimensional until the final scene was her just being a demon and flying away. And I was like, well, that really did suck. And yeah, that's my that's why I will never read another Joe Abercrombie book. Maybe he's improved since then. Maybe he's got some books that really are pretty good, but you would probably have to pay me a lot of money to read them. So thanks for watching. Bye.